last few days. I'm Stanley Farrar.
And I'm Robert Farrar.
What is this, our Halloween special? I'm Joshua Farrar. We're about 2 weeks out. It's a little early.
Wow.
I know this is going to be episode 60, but still. Chose a weird number to start changing up your intro.
Well, when you oh, variety is the spice of life.
uh, until you've got nothing but
Nutmeg,
variety shows, in
Speaking,
which case it's
ginger.
not very varied anymore.
there was a time that actually took place where the variety show was king.
Yeah, I'm aware.
But alas, the Muppets are no longer with us.
The Muppets, Hee Haw, uh, whatever show that one crooner that I forget the name of, but he was a constant drunk. Not quite Bing Crosby.
Dean Martin.
I don't think it was. It might have been Dean Martin. He had a variety show.
What about Frank Sinatra? Did he?
No. I think Lucille Ball had one.
And
though.
see, I was thinking farther back.
You're talking about vaudeville, aren't you?
Back when the no, even
vaudeville
though they
was
are a
never the
variety show.
main scene.
Uh,
Vaudeville was built of
uh,
the underground type.
I was ta- I, I was talking about the radio shows. Because you've taken a look at there for a while. Abbott and Costello was a variety show. Uh, Jack Benny was a variety show. Oh, Bob Hope's show was a variety show. I mean, just about every
Well,
major comedian's show was a variety show.
that's because they learned back then a lesson that they've forgotten, by the way, is that if you play nothing but music on repeat, is you run out of music to play and it gets dull.
It's true.
Yes, it is true. That's one of the problems with these modern stations being automated is they play the same thing over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. It's also one of the reasons why, while I was in Virginia, my favorite channel was the 1920s radio program, which is an odd naming scheme considering they rarely ever played anything from the 1920s. Most of what they played was from the 1930s, and some of it went back to the 19 teens. And it
So they just like skipped over the
and
20s.
they went up to the 1950s depending on rearrangements and reperformances.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they had an entire night dedicated to comedy shows, which was nice. I liked that.
Speaking about comedy shows, our current president says that he can fix all the problems in our country when it comes to the supply chain by talking.
And you gotta remember, this is a guy who can barely speak.
He says it's no longer a problem, so therefore it's no longer a problem.
What he's done is he's come to an agreement with major ports. They're going to work 24/7 during a staffing shortage. Now, anyone who's ever worked during a staffing shortage in normal hours knows that it's tough. But being overworked and doubly overworked
I'd quit.
is asking, yeah, that's how you get a bigger staffing shortage.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens when that sort of thing happens. Is people quit. Right now, they've taken and complicated things to where people don't want to become truck drivers because all the restrictions. You've got train is actually where most freight is hauled. but the train industry is facing the same obstacles that the trucking industry is, and that's fuel
For
costs.
shame, they trained for this.
They've been training for this their whole lives.
Uh, uh, s- uh, then there's the fact that you have to have supplies coming in.
True.
And what makes him think that our entire supply chain should be from foreign countries in the first place?
Well, he does seem
But it
pretty
doesn't
dead
matter
set in
because the
killing off
supply.
the American economy. Bolstering
But
foreign
the
economies just
American
seems par for
supply
the course.
chain is the American supply chain. Nobody wants to work. Either they can't or they don't want to.
Well,
And so he takes and comes out on TV asking OSHA to take and to start restricting every company that's above 100 people.
And OSHA said, we'll think about it, but they haven't actually done anything.
well,
Well, he
interesting
didn't
thing
make it
about
an official
OSHA
order.
is OSHA only has any power as long as people are willing to listen to them. Once they can no longer run their
Well, they do have.
businesses under the restrictions of OSHA, OSHA goes out the window. What are they going to do? Try to fine them? Fining only works as long as people are willing to pay.
That's it. That's exactly what they plan to do is fine them.
Like I said, if you just the weird thing about a fine is if everyone just at the same time says no, they can't do anything. Granted, you wind up in the
Well,
prisoner dilemma at that point, but still.
they run into the same problem though that they're going to have to face in Chicago, because Chicago is taken in Texas the Texas abortion bill and applied it to guns in Illinois. So
Well,
now
it doesn't
gun
surprise me
ownership
that
can,
Illinois is violating the Constitution again.
but it was a Chicago congresswoman that put the bill forward to make it to where people can sue gun owners for $10,000.
Sounds like a
Which
good
isn't
way for people to
constitutional.
start getting shot.
It would make sense to take and just revolt.
The chickens are revolting. Finally, we agree on something.
Finally, we
That movie was better than it had any real right to be.
Oh, one of that company's best-selling movies of all time.
From the makers of Wallace and
it
Gromit,
is the
that's
highest.
saying something.
Yes. But that it well, they also had the bright idea. Well, we'll take and s- sue the gangs for criminal activity.
I don't think they realize how things work.
One, you have to have evidence, and you have to have people collecting the evidence.
That sounds like a
Well,
really good way
technically,
to
you don't
lose
have to
all of
have
your
evidence to sue.
investigators.
They don't really care.
That sounds
They're
like
wanting to defund the police anyway.
white collar people trying to fix a problem that can't be fixed with paperwork.
Actually, you know what's really
In
interesting
fact,
about the defund the police movement?
most problems can't be fixed with paperwork. This may shock people out there, but making more paperwork to fix a problem usually has the opposite effect. I know I've just shocked and astounded the bureaucrats out there, but paperwork only makes things worse, not better.
But you know what's fascinating about the defund the police movement? Is how big it's backfired. The
That was
vast
never a
majority of the
surprise, though.
places that were pushing well, I don't mean by a surge in crime. Most places that were pushing for defunding the police have actually brought back the police and started paying them more than they were before.
Well, that's because the places that tried to fund them had a skyrocket of crime, though. We're talking up to 300% increases. Nationwide, the increase is went up to 30%, and that is in areas, and when you figure the majority of the country, the crime rate didn't increase. So that says something.
Then the Chicago politicians go outside and are like, hmm, I see no difference. Once you reach a certain level of bad, it's hard to tell the next one level from the other.
Well, like I've said, one death is a tragedy, 1,000 is a statistic.
Which is why the media loves pointing out individual cases of people who died
Yeah.
from the coronavirus.
But
Or really anything.
but you notice but you notice they take and point out individual cases, but they don't take and cover individual cases that don't fit their narrative.
It's true. Like how the media in Alberta, well, in Alberta recently, it pointed out a 14-year-old who had died, who happened to have major health complications. So they weren't the norm.
Well, a person who professed to be his sister said he had terminal brain cancer, and they put him down as a COVID death.
It's COVID related. uh,
South Park was right. As
yeah,
much as I hate to say it,
that
South
was
Park was
an
right.
unironically good South Park episode. And that they rarely make good episodes.
Well, I haven't seen it, so I don't know.
Um, spoilers to boil down the episode is the entire town gets shut down for COVID, but I think the parents sue extra hard to get the schools back up and running. But the police officers are being defunded. But the teachers refuse to go back to work. So the police officers end up becoming the teachers, and so they can actually still get paid and actually have a job. And they force everyone into going back to school, whether the kids want to or not. One of the main characters, and ironically the largest recurring villain, Cartman, um, of course, ends up causing problems immediately. And the police officers end up shooting one of the kids, specifically a black kid that had absolutely nothing to do with the fight that was going on, because
Which, from what
they
I've heard,
mock
they
everybody.
always shoot the black kid.
Yes, yes, they do. Um, but the kid whose name is Token, because he is the token black guy in the series, gets sent to the hospital, and they say that that his injury was COVID related. So they end up quarantining the whole school and locking it down and forcing all the kids to stay in the school with the police officers that just shot the kid because it was COVID related. And when one of the main characters complains about this whole thing, they say, "What do you mean it was COVID related? We watched you shoot him." I said, "Well, if it wasn't for COVID, we wouldn't be working here, so therefore he wouldn't have been shot. So of course it's COVID's fault. Which
That's got
was
a twisted sense of logic to it. You know that.
uh, that was pretty much the. There was a couple of extra side points, but that was the key of the a plot of that episode. I haven't watched an episode since, but that one was kind of funny.
Refresh my memory on one of the other subjects we took to discuss before we started.
Let's see, inflation at 5%.
Yeah, we haven't even talked about that.
Yeah. Let's
So when
see.
it comes to inflation at 5%, where they come up with 5%, have they looked at? They don't include gas and food or clothing when their calculations.
Yeah.
Necessities they don't count. And that's the most important inflation there is.
Yeah.
And that's through the roof right now. During the pandemic, gas around here got to less than $1 a gallon. Now it's almost up to $3.
Nationwide, it's pushing 5. And the thing about it is the cost of food has gone through the roof. Cost of property has gone through the roof. Property that 6 months ago would have sold for, well, I should say a year ago, would have sold for around $70,000 is running $170,000 now. There are some plots in town that we're talking point 0.24 percent of an acre and tenths of an acre, and it's running $52,000 for an empty lot.
We're in a bubble, and you know what happens when bubbles pop? That's when you dive on it.
You get soap
The,
everywhere.
the rent has been going through the roof. There was one person recently who their rent went from 600 and some dollars a month over 1,000. It's unreal.
And it's not sustainable.
But whenever you're devaluating the currency, it's people take and start buying up property and gold and silver because they want stuff that doesn't fluctuate market wise so much in order to take and secure their funds. That and the IRS is now checking everybody's bank account for or any transactions over $600.
Time to return to the barter system.
So it does that may very well happen. That's not unusual in this kind of a economic situation. That's what
Yep,
happened
it's
in
time
the
to go to the
Soviet
great
Union.
currency of America: ammunition.
Well, there may come a time where ammunition is the currency.
That was an amazing design decision for the Metro series, by the way.
It was smart. And a lot of preppers have latched on to it. Which I don't know which came first, the preppers latching onto it or Metro latching onto it.
Doesn't really matter. The whole fact that you had to choose between buying your services and needs or using the bullets to kill irradiated zombies in the subtunnels underneath Russia was a good game design decision.
Yeah, it was.
You had to make choices.
Yeah.
When it comes down to our society currently, they're doing everything by the book to destroy our economy.
And they seem to try to be hiding it too. Like a news report today that I heard today, they were trying to pass it off as things improving when they said that first-time unemployment registers are down for the first time since the start of the pandemic. And I noticed that they were very, very specific in first-time unemployment registrations. Didn't say anything about people who were already on unemployment or people who were
Yeah, because we know people aren't.
or people who were
We know that people
reapplying
aren't going back to work.
for unemployment, just first time. And there's a
Because they
finite
also
population in the United States. Eventually, if unemployment is high enough, your first time unemployment registration will hit practically zero.
one thing you've also got to consider is that they changed how they calculated unemployment during the Obama administration and never went back to the old way.
Mm-hmm.
If you quit looking for a job or your time has run out on and your unemployment, they quit counting you as unemployed.
But we know that people aren't returning to work because the federal jobs report, was roughly 2 million off of its estimate for September, which hit Biden really hard in the ratings and shows that our economy is really depressed right now.
You mean Brandon?
Brandon. Yes, it hit Brandon really hard in the ratings.
Let's go, Brandon.
They already stated that he has got the lowest approval rating in modern history.
Which is a very ambiguous term, by the way. Where do you draw the line at modern history? Because I doubt he's Hoover level low yet.
Well, they don't normally consider Hoover modern history anymore. But
Hoover was 100.
when
Well, yeah, Hoover was less than 100 years ago.
yes, he
There are
was.
people a lot who were alive for Hoover. There were people who were 10 years old when Hoover was.
Robert, you do realize that they count the 60s as barely being modern times. World War II
And
is
I'm
no
saying
longer
they're
counted as modern
wrong.
times.
I'm
fact,
saying they're wrong. There are still people alive from that era.
20 years is enough to be counted as an antique. Or vintage.
25.
25? Okay.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's not my fault they have a skewed time scale and have no respect for people who are still alive.
You're just upset that 90s music is classified as classic rock nowadays.
I don't care about 90s music. I listen to 80s music.
I know. It seems really weird that classic rock when I was still in like elementary school, the 50s and 60s was considered classic rock, and 80s was its own subgenre of 80s rock, and 90s music was, well, modern day.
garbage.
And now everyone forgets that 50s and 60s rock ever existed. They call 80s rock classic rock. Well, 80s and 90s rock classic rock. And now modern day stuff is, well, garbage, as
Well,
modern day
most
stuff is
people our
always
age
garbage.
generally lump it as 70. Most people our age lump 70s and 80s rock as classic rock. And yes, 90s music is still garbage.
90s music was always garbage, with the
And so is
exception of
70s rock.
select things. Well,
Yeah, well, there were
70s
some
rock was,
some
but
select
there was other genres that were still doing fine.
yes.
Well,
Like the band we
After
made a
all,
joke
think about
about
it. The
before
Cars
the
started
episode
in the
started.
70s. Think about it though. The Cars were
our
technically
local
70s rock.
classic. Yes, they were. The our local classic channel plays 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Uh, so hey, remember? Well, you know how all those radio stations that are talking about we play the hits from 80s, 90s, and today. They skip 20 years in that estimate.
Yeah, there is one that does that. In fact, those particular channels within about a month is going to shift will shift over and play nothing but Christmas music.
So, the weird thing about those things is they've been saying the exact same tagline for the last 30 years, and nobody has batted an eye.
What I want to know is why they bother with the modern.
I really don't know. Just stick with the 80s and
Because you
90s and go back if you're looking for something. There's been more than 2,000 years worth of music that's been created. We're not at a shortage. We don't need the new junk.
Well, you know, one of the interesting things about it is the fact that if you take and you look at what is popular on YouTube, the 80s music, you'll take a look through there and they'll have billions of views, millions and billions of views. You take and you look at the top songs today, and they're in the low million.
To be fair,
Low 100 millions, maybe.
one of the most viewed music videos on YouTube. Actually, a couple of the one of which is from the 90s. Early 90s if I recall correctly, but from the 90s. And one of which is from around 2012, 2013ish, maybe 2011.
A lot of the easiest way to have your music reach out to the most people is to get it to be a meme. As soon as it becomes a meme song, you're almost guaranteed a billion hits.
Robert knew what I was referencing. The songs that I was referencing was Never Gonna Give You Up. And
That's 80s.
is it 80s? I thought it was early 90s.
That was in the 80s.
Yes, it is. No, that's very much 80s.
What?
Very 80s.
Yeah, that's 80s.
Oh well. Sounded very
Trust
90s,
trust
though.
me, I was there.
All right. The other one I was referring to was Gangnam Style, which is definitely not 80s.
Now you take and 80s music was kind of a weird thing because it started in 75 and went into the 90s.
I mean, I can
That
think.
style of music started in 1975 and ended in the mid 90s.
You know, there was one song that for the longest time I thought it was 90s, like early 90s. because of what they had in the music video that was so egregiously 90s that it did not age well, but it was entertaining to watch because of that. But when I looked it up, it was actually like 2000, 2001 that it came out. And
Well, see, that's why music works. Music carries over into the decade after. If you look at 1950s music, it went well into the 60s.
the song I was referring to was oh man, I had it. Then I forgot it. It's a Bon Jovi song.
Well, some of the biggest modern hits have been copying
Oh, It's My Life was
older
the
styles.
song it is.
Yeah, that's that. I knew which song you were talking about. I couldn't put my thumb on the name.
But a lot of the really popular modern songs have been copying older styles.
Well, yeah.
The
And
Weekend, principally.
the reason for that I've noticed is this latest generation, like the latest 10 years or so, they haven't
Can't
managed
stand its own. Can't stand.
no, they haven't found an identity. They haven't found a sound identity that can identify them from the rest of the crowd.
So they started borrowing from their parents' generation.
Yeah.
The 80s did. I can say for a fact the 80s borrowed heavily from the 50s.
Well, they all borrow. Like there is an 80s
Hmm.
song called Putting on the Ritz. Now, if you ever do any research on
Hmm.
this, it was a remake of a song that was
Oh, that's
sung
an old one.
in the 50s. And if you look even deeper, you'll find that the 50s one was a reperformance of a song that was written in the 1930s.
Yes.
Also, the 1950s version is better than the 1980s version, and
Also,
not
the
nearly as weird.
1930s version is talking about Harlem.
The 1930s version is actually better than the 80s version.
It is, yeah.
The well, a lot of the big hits in the 1980s were remakes of 1960, 1961 songs.
Yeah, early 60s, usually early 60s girl groups.
Yeah.
Like the
Like
Chordettes.
Where Did Our Love Go? I believe that was the Chordettes who did Where Did Our Love Go.
uh,
But nobody takes and comes through and hits the really great ones like At the Laundromat.
oh man. The problem with songs like that is despite being so absolutely amazingly hilarious is that they never get the widespread appeal because they are very very reliant on people having a sense of humor. And
Uh-huh.
and 80% of the population does not have a sense of humor.
Which, I mean,
I
just comedians are under hard times because of that.
Comedians are under a hard time because of the politically correct cancel culture. You can't say anything that somebody might be offended by.
The only one
And
who
it's so
seems
easy to offend somebody.
the only one who seems to be immune to all this right now is Dave Chappelle. They keep
Yeah, I heard it
trying to
was
strike him
hilarious in
down,
his
but he just
special.
sort of keeps going.
I heard it was hilarious in his latest special because there were two obvious SJWs sitting in the front row, and the camera
Oh,
would pan to them, and they were
the
just.
clip of their expressions when he was making fun of specifically trannies at the time was hilarious.
Well, it's like a group of trans people stated that they didn't have a problem with people making trans jokes. They just didn't like the fact they were always making the same trans jokes. And the commentator said, "Well, when they quit being funny, people quit talking about them."
But you gotta remember, with these people, this is their identity. So yes, they do have a problem with people making trans jokes because as far as they're concerned, it's a personal attack on them. It's an attack on who they are.
Well, I am an alumnus of Texas A&M, despite the fact I never went to Texas A&M. I went to West Texas State University, but it has later become Texas A&M Western Brand. So I bec without so because of the fumbling and tossing, I now have transcripts from Texas A&M. So became an Aggie. Texas Aggie jokes go wild, and I love telling Aggie jokes. I've got cousins that actually went to Texas A&M, so I love telling Aggie jokes. You think I'm going to stop just because I became an Aggie? Come on now. If it's a good joke, it's a good joke. Come on.
But there was one comedian who said about Dave Chappelle's latest special that it was almost like watching the slaves be freed as the comedians were unchained.
This particular move, if reason has any place in it whatsoever, should start to break the left's coalition.
Because it's so divisive and so incoherent.
It's divisive, it's coherent, they're turning on each other because they have opposing viewpoints and opposing positions and goals that go directly contrary to each other. Eventually, it's got to fracture. You can only apply so much pressure before it breaks. And they're not real strong people in the first place.
Yeah, I was looking up some news one time in about something in Europe. I can't remember what it was off the top of my head, but I managed to stumble across this paper, and I did some research on the paper itself and realized that it was actually a European socialist paper. And what I thought was fascinating was that it was bashing the French government. Now, for anyone who doesn't know about the French government, it's a socialist government. Kind of a light socialist government. And I realized as I was reading that paper that socialists inherently battle socialists. If you're not part of their faction, they will try to overthrow you. That's why whenever a communist revolution happens, they have to immediately get rid of all dissidents. Because any other communists will try to overthrow the communist government to establish another communist government. It's self-eating, And really, that's the case with a lot of left-wing movements, is they just keep eating their own, becoming more and more radical.
Well, it's the problem with tribalism, is what it is. They build their faction base by tribalism. And then they're
Yes, they do, and they
surprised
promote
when the
tribalism.
tribes stick to their tribe.
Well, they say that Pelosi has gone to a point where she's running the House of Representatives like she's a lame duck um, Speaker of the House, like she could never, like it's her time's over because she's no longer paying attention to what's going on. She's just dictating and going off to other countries and to parliamentary leaders conventions and such. It's, but blocking anyone who's not part of her group from having a say and ignoring the law even. There's they've taken and made it to where they're charging $10,000 if you walk through the wrong door. She's a tyrant.
But she won't be able to keep leadership this way, and she is losing her grip on the leadership. I forgot what her name is, but the head of the Progressive Caucus is ripping it away from her, inch by inch.
Well, the Progressive Caucus never did like her.
But they're the largest caucus in the Democrat Party. They swing the most weight. And they're currently putting a stop to their plans. Because they don't think that the current infrastructure bill goes far enough. So they plan on voting against it.
Well, that's good news at least.
Yes, it is. Let them eat their own. Let it happen.
Well, the thing is,
Well,
it's not
it
their
happened
own. They should have split into different parties years ago. They're not the same party.
I mean, they're
well,
basically the same
Democrats,
party.
the Democrats have been a radical left-wing party since the 1800s.
Yeah.
And Republicans used to be.
And the Republicans are a divided party.
Yes. But so are the Democrats. The Republicans show it more. Until recently. Now the divisions are becoming increasingly obvious, and that could lead to an open split. Now you could say the same about the Republicans, but it hasn't happened yet. But they don't seem to be as divided as the Democrats.
No, the
Not as
Republicans
deeply
are
divided.
actually more divided than the Democrats. But the Democrats are doing something that is inherently against their own interest by forcing anyone on the moderate line and declaring them a right-wing extremist, therefore forcing them to align with the Republicans. Doesn't
think
change
it's
how
kind of
divided they are,
interesting
it's
you
just
use the
aligning
term
their
moderate.
interests.
You realize that
Yeah.
everybody that you just called moderate would have been considered radical leftists when I was young?
Yeah,
I
that's the
don't
weird
consider
thing about
Cinema or Manchin a moderate.
how perspective works, because they are relatively moderate in comparison.
Because, yeah, Cinema and Manchin aren't moderates.
Yeah.
Also, how did Manchin ever get elected in West Virginia? What's up with that?
Probably corruption.
Because West Virginia has a reputation like Oklahoma. They don't just elect Democrats.
Actually, they've elected Democrats for years.
Well, yeah, actually, I wonder why. Because they were never. They were still part of the North, and the North did Republicans, and
In fact, they split off from Virginia in the Civil
But
War because they didn't align with the Democrat agenda at the time.
they didn't align with the pro-slave agenda at the time.
Same difference.
Ele- they still elected Democrats.
Ah,
huh.
They were an anti-slave, pro-Democrat division.
which is a
But
rarity.
currently, lately they've had a reputation for being like Oklahoma and being a deep red.
Mhm. Well, they tend to be more conservative as a rule, as a general population.
Yeah.
But the
On a
uh,
related yet unrelated note, I found out recently that neither Alabama nor West Virginia have the highest incest rates in the United States.
Oklahoma cracks down on that
okay,
sort of stuff.
Yeah, I know Oklahoma
Oklahoma's got
does,
some pretty tight laws
but
on that.
what I was actually really entertained to find out the states that had the highest, but neither West Virginia nor Alabama were even on the top 10.
okay, which were
Washington and Oregon are 1 and 2 respectively.
Oof. Oof. Why am I not surprised?
that doesn't surprise me. That doesn't surprise me at all.
It didn't
When you have an
surprise me
extreme
after I actually
leftist in control,
didn't surprise me once I took the time to actually think about it either. But it was very
it also
entertaining.
explains a lot of things.
Yeah.
It explains a lot of things about what's going on there.
Yeah, it does.
I'm surprised California wasn't way up there too.
I didn't I didn't check. I don't remember what 3 through 10 was. So, I can't say. But 1 and 2 being Oregon and Washington was hilarious.
Yeah, they always like to joke that the hillbillies and the Southerners are inbred, but no, it's the left. Well, I hear
Are you
that
actually looking
keyboard
up?
just clicking away.
Yes, I'm actually looking it up. It's not my fault that there's a loud keyboard on this thing. Most inbred states 2021. That's actually Washington, Oregon, Montana, South Dakota, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Arkansas. They've got a long list here. Inbreeding is more common in the following states, and then it lists like 20 states.
That's half the country.
Yes, there's laws against it in most states.
Yeah, but most of the time it happens accidentally because people not keeping
And
track of
then
their
there are
family
the
trees.
cases with So, one of my teachers in college, who was a lawyer, he still has his law license, but he pointed out that marrying your cousin is illegal in Oklahoma, marrying your first cousin, but it's not illegal in Texas. So if you decide to marry your first cousin in Oklahoma and get arrested, you know what they'll tell you? You should have gone to Texas.
Actually, I think it's illegal in Texas, but
That wouldn't stop the
I've heard it's
Oklahomans
not
from
illegal in
saying it
Arkansas
about
though.
Texas.
Oklahoma will gladly smear Texas.
Now I would argue that um, inbreeding is going to increase
Well, yeah.
with the hookup culture of our society. People are just having one night stands all over the place. They don't know who the kids don't know who their parents really are. It's just a matter of time before inbreeding increases,
Yeah.
becomes more common.
And the weird thing is, it won't be their fault. They'll have no idea. They'll have no way to know.
Hmm. Because they say that one of the reasons why people have such a hard time finding long-term relationships on these dating apps is they're actually apps for just hook.
He's been targeted for
He couldn't spit it
assassination
out. It was too.
by Tinder.
We should have known. The internet mob got
You
it.
survived Tinder's assassination attempt.
Apparently, but they're just sites people are using for hookups. They say that according to one report, that a large portion of prostitution has gotten to where it's moved on to the internet and onto these type programs. And then you've got a large portion of the feminists that they're not interested in a long-term relationship when they're young, so they're sluts and just take and go from one hookup to another, one night stands until they get old enough where now they realize they're about to quit being of any interest whatsoever, and well, actually most of the time they wait till after that, and
Most
then
of the
they
time, they don't
suddenly
figure
want
it
a
out till after
relationship
that.
and they can't find, because men aren't really interested in a whore.
I loved it the way it was put. I saw on the internet once. So there was this trend in on TikTok for women to compare themselves to cars. So like the number of drivers they had were the number of people they'd had sex with. The number of owners were the number of people they'd been in relationship. Bumper stickers were tattoos. Uh, Year model, obviously, how old when they were born, stuff like that.
Sounds like a terrible idea
Well,
for everyone involved, but go on.
the video I was watching that was talking about it, in the comments, someone put, "Everybody loves the smell of a new car." And there's a lot of truth to that. There's a reason why virginity was very valued among ancient cultures. Because virgins were pure.
Well,
The
and then you
in the
take
Undiseased, for
it,
one
it
thing.
shows the decline of Christianity.
well, yeah,
Yes.
in the Old Testament, it talks about if a man and a woman have sex outside of marriage, then the man was to marry her, unless her father said no. Now, the really interesting thing about that is A, it sets the precedent for fathers to look after their daughters, and in that culture, if somebody had sex outside of marriage, they didn't marry anyone else. So if the father said no, she wasn't going to be
She would
doing
never
it
be
with
married.
anyone again. Yeah, she would never
Yeah,
be
she'd
married
never be married.
because the idea was she was defiled. She was not good. No man, no respectable man would touch her.
Well, in the Old Testament law, it says if you look upon the nakedness of a maiden, you had to marry her. You didn't actually even have to have sex with her.
True. But it's still that idea of purity and that idea that a virgin is valuable.
Now, while the New Testament doesn't actually talk much uh, about virginity and the value thereof, it does speak a lot about fornication and the wickedness of that.
And
Yes, it
really,
does.
say what you like about the institution of marriage, but it is very, very good at reducing or even eliminating incest. Because it is
Yes, it
very,
is.
very good for keeping clear, proper family trees that are recorded and you know where they are. As long as someone takes the time to actually do it.
Um, did I tell you about the
The what?
The family.
the past?
I don't believe I've heard this story, no.
Okay, a man married a woman who already had a daughter. They had kids. She died. He married the stepdaughter.
Bad move.
They had children. So now two people I know, their uncles and aunts are all their brothers and sisters.
That was just a bad move on that guy's part.
Yes, but marriage didn't prevent it. They weren't blood relatives.
Yeah, but remember how I started with reduce.
Well, it's not true incest. It is an ugly family tree, but it's not true
Very ugly
incest.
family tree that probably should have been pruned. But
But like I said, biologically speaking, it wasn't incest. Psychologically speaking, I think it was. Because you raise a child, even if it's not your blood, you think of them as your child. So to marry them, that's incest,
it's also really messed up.
psychologically speaking.
Really, really messed up.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode. And feel free to hit the like button, subscribe, leave a comment down in the comment section below, all of that stuff, and see you next time.